Nobody expected the 12th caregiver to last a week. Nico Morelli was certain she wouldn't survive the first day. Rain whispered against the towering windows of the Morelli estate, blurring the Manhattan skyline into streaks of silver and grey. From the library overlooking the Hudson River, Nico watched the weather erase the city that had once feared the sound of his name. 6 months earlier, every phone call had demanded his decision. Every meeting had waited for his arrival. Every room had fallen silent the moment he entered. Now the only thing waiting for him each morning was the quiet mechanical hum beneath his wheelchair. At 36, Nico Morelli still carried himself like a man born to command. Broad shoulders filled a charcoal cashmere sweater, dark hair remained perfectly trimmed despite rarely leaving the mansion, and his sharp green eyes had lost none of the intensity that once unsettled powerful executives and politicians alike. Yet none of those things mattered anymore. Strangers no longer noticed the confidence in his posture. They noticed the wheelchair first. They always noticed the wheelchair first. He slowly turned away from the rain as the grandfather clock chimed 9 times. Another day. Another routine, another reminder that life had become a collection of carefully measured hours instead of impossible ambitions. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Oliver stepped inside carrying a leather folder beneath one arm. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his calm expression hadn't changed much in the 23 years he had served the Morelli family. If anyone in the mansion still spoke to Nico like the man he used to be instead of the patient he had become, it was Oliver. "Your new caregiver will arrive in 20 minutes, sir," he said. Nico barely looked up. "Number 12, yes." Oliver placed the folder on a nearby table. Licensed occupational therapist, excellent references, 5 years of rehabilitation experience. Requested personally by the agency director. Nico let out a slow breath. The agency still hasn't figured it out. Oliver adjusted his cuff. Figured out what? Nobody stays. A quiet silence settled between them. 11 caregivers had accepted the position over the past 6 months. Most had never been told the patient's name before arriving. The medical agency described him only as a private billionaire recovering from a spinal injury. By the time they realized the quiet man inside the stone mansion had once been one of the most influential figures in organized business circles, they were already overwhelmed by the atmosphere surrounding him. Some became intimidated. Others became uncomfortable with the constant security. A few simply couldn't endure caring for someone who had stopped believing recovery mattered. "Perhaps this one is different," Oliver offered. Nico's expression remained unreadable. "You said that about number 8. For the first time that morning, Oliver smiled. "Fair enough." Nico rolled closer to the fireplace, staring at flames that produced warmth he no longer seemed able to feel. Every specialist insisted recovery required hope. Hope required purpose. Purpose required accepting the future. He had spent 6 months pretending he believed them. The truth was far simpler. Every morning he woke remembering the exact moment everything had changed. Not because of the pain. The pain had faded months ago. What remained was the memory of someone else's sacrifice, a debt he could never repay no matter how many sleepless nights he carried it through. That memory visited him before sunrise every single day. Another voice echoed faintly through the entrance hall. Female, young, entirely too energetic for a mansion that had forgotten laughter. "Wait, hold on." A suitcase rolled loudly across the marble floor. "This place is huge. Are people supposed to know where they're going in here?" One of the security officers answered politely, though his voice was almost impossible to hear. "Someone will escort you." "Good," she replied, "because I already took 2 wrong turns and accidentally apologized to what I thought was a person. It was a statue." Oliver glanced toward the hallway before looking back at Nico. "She sounds unprepared human," Oliver corrected quietly. Nico said nothing. Footsteps approached at an unusually quick pace. Not rushed, curious. Whoever she was, she didn't sound nervous. That alone was unexpected. Most visitors lowered their voices before reaching the library as though the mansion itself demanded silence. The footsteps stopped outside the open doorway. A young woman stood there wearing navy scrubs beneath a light grey rain jacket. An oversized canvas backpack hanging from one shoulder while damp strands of auburn hair escaped a loose ponytail. Freckles dotted her face beneath clear blue eyes that moved naturally around the room instead of avoiding it. She noticed the towering bookshelves first. Finally, she looked at Nico. There was no flicker of recognition, no fear, no awkward sympathy. She simply offered a warm smile that reached her eyes. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Eden Sullivan." She glanced toward Oliver before looking back at Nico. The agency said my new patient preferred honesty, so I'll start with that. Nico raised one eyebrow but remained silent. Eden folded her rain jacket over one arm and smiled again. This house is beautiful. She looked toward the rain-covered windows, but it feels like it's been holding its breath for a very long time. The words settled into the silence. Neither security officer reacted, though one briefly exchanged a glance with the other before returning his attention to the hallway. Oliver remained perfectly still. Nico studied the woman standing before him, waiting for uncertainty to appear. Once she realized exactly who he was, it never came. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't pretending everything would be okay. She had simply walked into the quietest house in New York and spoken as though silence wasn't something to fear. Somewhere inside the mansion, a phone vibrated once before falling quiet again. Nico noticed one of the security officers glance discreetly at the screen, his expression tightening for the briefest moment before he slipped the phone back into his jacket. Nico said nothing. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous news rarely arrived with raised voices. Then he looked back at Eden Sullivan, the 12th caregiver who had unknowingly stepped into a house filled with unfinished ghosts, and for the first time in 6 months, something inside the silence shifted. For the next several seconds, neither of them spoke. Nico Morelli had spent years learning how silence could make people uncomfortable. Business rivals filled it with nervous explanations. Reporters filled it with reckless questions. Even the previous caregivers had rushed to reassure him that everything would be all right. Eden Sullivan simply waited, calm and patient, as though silence was another language she understood. Nico finally broke it. "Do you know why the agency almost did not send you here?" Eden nodded once. "Because after I accepted the assignment, they told me your full name." His expression did not change. "And they told me some people would recognize it and decide the job was not for them." "I recognize the stories," she answered without hesitation. "Stories are rarely the same thing as the person sitting in front of me." Nico studied her carefully. That answer was either remarkably naive or surprisingly wise. "Which?" "You are either very brave," he said quietly, "or very stubborn." A small smile appeared on Eden's face. "My grandmother always said there is a fine line between the two." Before Nico could respond, Eden reached for the handle of her oversized backpack. The zipper snagged unexpectedly, throwing the bag off balance. It slipped from her hand and bumped against a narrow pedestal beside the doorway. An antique porcelain vase rocked dangerously from side to side. One of the security officers instinctively stepped forward, prepared to catch it before it struck the marble floor. The vase wobbled once more before settling back into place. Eden stared at it with wide eyes before letting out a relieved breath. "Well, that almost became the most expensive first impression of my career." No one spoke. She looked toward the security officer and offered an apologetic smile. "Thank you for having quicker reflexes than I do." The guard gave a brief respectful nod before returning to his position. Oliver lowered his eyes, though the corners of his mouth threatened to betray the beginning of a smile. Nico waited for embarrassment to overwhelm her the way it usually overwhelmed visitors inside the mansion. Instead, Eden picked up her backpack, brushed an invisible speck of dust from the fabric, and continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Somehow, that amused him far more than the near accident itself. "I suppose I should start by showing you your therapy schedule," she said, pulling a neatly organized folder from the front pocket. "Unless you plan on firing me before lunch. That depends." Nico folded his hands across his lap. "On what? Whether you continue trying to redecorate my library?" Eden glanced at the vase before looking back at him. "Fair point. I will stay away from the antiques." For the first time in months, the corner of Nico's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. It was gone before anyone could call it a smile, but Oliver noticed. He had spent more than 2 decades serving the Morelli family. He knew every expression Nico had ever worn. This one had almost disappeared from memory. "Miss Sullivan," Oliver said gently, "allow me to show you the guest suite before you begin your orientation. Please call me Eden." She followed Oliver into the hallway, then suddenly stopped and turned back toward Nico. He raised an eyebrow. "I know you hired a caregiver." She shook her head lightly. "Actually, your attorney hired one. I only accepted the position." Nico remained silent. "Trust works both ways," she continued. "You do not have to like me today. I just hope you will give me the chance to earn your trust before deciding I belong with the other 11. Then she disappeared down the hallway beside Oliver. Nico watched the empty doorway long after she was gone. She had not promised miracles. She had not offered empty encouragement. She had not looked at him with sympathy. She had simply asked for an opportunity. That was unexpectedly difficult to dismiss. Nearly 30 minutes later, Nico wheeled himself toward the study overlooking the front gate. Rain still drifted across the grounds in thin silver lines. From the security monitor on his desk, he noticed a dark sedan parked across the street with its engine running. It had remained there longer than any delivery vehicle normally would. He pressed the intercom button. "Marcus." "Yes, sir?" "The sedan outside the west gate. We have eyes on it. No immediate threat, but the driver has not left the vehicle." Nico released the button without another word. Experience had taught him that patience often revealed more than confrontation. His attention shifted as a faint melody floated from the second floor, not loud. Just soft acoustic guitar playing from a small portable speaker that Eden had apparently unpacked with the rest of her belongings. The sound drifted gently through hallways that had known nothing except whispers for half a year. A few moments later came the unmistakable sound of a drawer sliding open, followed by Eden laughing quietly at herself. "Of course." Her voice echoed faintly upstairs. "I packed 3 notebooks and forgot my phone charger." Nico closed his eyes for only a second. The mansion had become so accustomed to silence that ordinary life sounded almost unfamiliar. Somewhere beyond the rain, the city continued chasing another busy morning. Inside the Morelli estate, a woman who refused to fear old stories had unknowingly taken the first step toward changing a house that had forgotten what hope sounded like. Sunlight reached the breakfast room before Nico Morelli did. It slipped through tall windows in long golden lines, warming polished hardwood that had spent months hidden beneath heavy velvet curtains. His wheelchair stopped just inside the doorway. The room looked unfamiliar, almost a eyes narrowed. Who opened the curtains? The question settled over the table like a command everyone already understood. Oliver glanced toward Eden Sullivan without speaking. She was placing fresh strawberries beside a bowl of oatmeal, while a small portable speaker on the kitchen counter played quiet acoustic guitar at barely more than a whisper. She looked up with the same calm expression she had worn the day before. "I did." Nico's voice remained even. "Close them, no." The single word froze the room. The housekeeper stopped pouring coffee. One security officer instinctively shifted his weight forward before catching himself. Oliver slowly set a porcelain cup onto its saucer without making a sound. No one inside the Morelli estate had ever answered Nico that way. Not employees, not advisors, certainly not someone who had worked there for less than 24 hours. Nico held her gaze. "You are refusing a direct instruction. I am refusing one that makes your recovery harder." Her tone stayed respectful, almost conversational. "The medical records your attorney released to your treatment team show that every specialist recommended more daylight and a consistent morning routine. You hired me to help you recover, not to help you hide." Silence stretched between them. Nico disliked how easily she had said it, not because she was wrong, but because she had spoken without judgment. She had simply stated a fact. His fingers tightened slightly around the armrest of his wheelchair. For 6 months he had controlled one thing inside the mansion. The curtains stayed closed, the outside world stayed outside. Nothing changed unless he allowed it. "Close them," he repeated. Eden slowly walked toward the windows. For a brief second, everyone expected her to obey. Instead, she rested one hand lightly against the curtain without pulling it. "If you still want them closed after breakfast, I will close them myself." She looked back at him. "But I am asking for 1 hour. Just one." Nico said nothing. The room waited. Seconds passed. Rain clouds had disappeared overnight, leaving blue sky reflected across the Hudson River beyond the estate. The warmth on his face felt unfamiliar after months spent hiding from mornings. Finally, he exhaled. 1 hour. Oliver quietly released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Eden smiled once, small and genuine. "Fair deal." She returned to the table without celebrating the victory. That surprised Nico almost as much as the refusal itself. Most people wanted credit for changing his mind. She acted as though they had simply solved a practical problem together. While carrying a basket of fresh rolls across the room, Eden suddenly stopped. Her eyes settled on a large landscape painting above the fireplace. She frowned. "That cannot possibly be intentional." Oliver followed her gaze. "Is something wrong, the painting?" She tilted her head. "It is crooked." No one answered. She looked around the room. "Seriously? Nobody has noticed?" Before anyone could respond, she spotted a sturdy wooden stool beside the bookcase. "Miss Sullivan," Oliver began carefully as she reached for it. "That stool belonged to Mr. Morelli's grandfather." Eden paused, looked down at the worn oak beneath her hand, then smiled. "Then I promised to treat it with respect." She climbed up carefully, adjusted the frame less than an inch, climbed back down and stepped away. There. Oliver blinked twice before quietly admitting, "Remarkable. It has been hanging that way for months." "Now your neck will not hurt every time you walk through the room," Eden replied. Nico looked from the painting to the old stool. "My grandfather built that himself. He knew what he was doing," she answered. "It is sturdier than most new furniture." For the first time in many months, something almost resembling amusement Nico's face. He would have liked hearing that. Eden did not react to the change in his expression. She simply opened a folder and slid a printed schedule across the table. 9:30, physical therapy. Nico barely looked at it. "Cancel it, no," he almost sighed. "You seem comfortable disagreeing with me, only when I think you are making tomorrow harder than today." She tapped the calendar gently. 7 appointments had been highlighted in yellow. 7 cancellations in 6 weeks, kept reserving time because she believed you would eventually come back. She has 1 appointment left before the clinic closes your case. Nico stared at the paper. "I am tired of people measuring progress in inches." Eden folded her arms lightly. "Measure effort." He looked away toward the bright windows. "You think 10 minutes in a therapy room will change anything?" "No," her answer came immediately. "I think choosing not to quit might." That answer lingered longer than either of them expected. It was not optimism, it was not a promise, it was simply an invitation. Before Nico could respond, Marcus stepped quietly beside Oliver. His voice remained almost inaudible, but Nico caught enough to understand. "The black sedan is back, same location, different driver." Nico's attention shifted toward the front gate beyond the long driveway. The dark vehicle waited beneath the same maple tree, as though time itself had stopped. Someone inside was patient, very patient. He knew that kind of patience. It belonged to people waiting for the right moment rather than the quickest one. Eden gently pushed the therapy schedule another inch closer. "The sunlight stays for 1 hour," she said softly. "Then we try 10 minutes. If you still hate therapy after 10 minutes, I will listen to every complaint you have on the drive back." Nico looked at the schedule, then at the sunlight stretching across the floor, and finally at the woman who had walked into his carefully controlled silence and broken more rules in 2 days than anyone else had dared to break in 6 months. For the first time since the accident, refusing to move forward no longer felt like the easiest choice. 10 minutes could not change a life. Nico Morelli had repeated that thought to himself often enough that it had become something close to truth. Yet as he sat outside the therapy room, staring through the open doorway, he realized he was no longer avoiding the equipment inside. He was avoiding the memories it forced him to confront. Eden Sullivan waited without speaking. She had set the therapy timer on a nearby table and stepped back several feet, giving him space instead of pressure. It was a decision Oliver quietly appreciated. Some people believed determination could be forced. Eden seemed to understand that pride rarely surrendered to force. Just as Nico rested one hand on the wheel of his chair, Marcus appeared in the hallway and stopped several feet away. He did not approach. He simply caught Nico's attention with a subtle nod toward the corridor. Nico immediately understood. "Oliver," he said calmly, "would you help Miss Sullivan review tomorrow's therapy schedule?" Oliver glanced at Marcus, then gave the slightest nod. "Of course, sir." Eden looked between them, recognizing there was a conversation she had not been invited to hear. She did not object. "I will be here when you are finished," she said. The timer has not started yet. Nico followed Marcus into the adjoining study, closing the door behind them. Only then did Marcus remove a plain manila envelope from inside his jacket. "It was delivered to the front gate 10 minutes ago," he said quietly. "No fingerprints, no return address. One of the cameras caught someone leaving it in the mailbox before driving away." Nico opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the front entrance of the estate taken from across the road sometime the previous afternoon. Eden stood near the front steps, smiling politely as she thanked one of the security officers after almost knocking over the antique vase. Beneath the photograph, 6 words had been written in neat black block letters. "You always did collect lost things." Nico's expression remained unreadable, but he recognized the handwriting immediately. Someone from his past wanted him to know 2 things. They knew where he lived, and now they knew Eden existed. He folded the photograph slowly before slipping it back into the envelope. "Double the patrols," he said quietly. "No one enters the estate without clearance." Marcus nodded. "Should Miss Sullivan be informed?" Nico looked toward the closed study door. "No, she could be at risk, which is exactly why she does not need to know." Marcus accepted the answer without another question. After he left, Nico remained alone inside the study for several minutes. His eyes drifted toward the bottom drawer of his desk. He opened it almost without thinking. Inside rested an old leather sketchbook that had not seen daylight in years. His fingertips brushed the worn cover before he lifted it onto the desk. Dust rose softly into the morning light. The first page revealed a pencil drawing of a modest apartment building with wide windows, rooftop gardens, and children playing beneath maple trees. Across the bottom of the page, written in youthful handwriting, were the words, "Every neighborhood deserves sunlight." Nico quietly closed his eyes. Long before expensive suits and private meetings defined his life, he had wanted to become an architect. He had spent evenings filling sketchbooks with libraries, clinics, schools, and apartment buildings that ordinary families could actually afford. His mother had believed every drawing deserved a frame. His father had believed every drawing was a distraction. Dreams do not protect a family, his father had once said. Influence does. Nico had stopped drawing before his 20th birthday. He had convinced himself he no longer cared. Yet somehow he had never thrown the sketchbooks away. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. "May I come in?" Eden asked from the hallway. Nico looked toward the closed door but did not answer immediately. She waited. No impatience, no repeated knocking, just quiet respect. Finally he spoke. "Come in." Eden stepped inside carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She placed one on the corner of the desk before noticing the open sketchbook. Her eyes lingered on the drawing for only a second before returning to Nico. She did not reach for it. She did not ask permission to look closer. "Oliver said you used to spend hours in this room," she said softly. Nico rested one hand on the worn leather cover. A long time ago, another silence settled between them. Unlike the silences that filled the mansion before her arrival, this one felt patient instead of empty. Eden looked toward the drawing again. Whoever made that building understood what home should feel like. Nico almost corrected her before realizing she had never assumed the artist was him. "I drew it," he admitted quietly. "When I was 17, she looked back at him. There was no surprise in her expression, only genuine curiosity. What changed? Nico turned another page. A neighborhood library, a public park, a rehabilitation clinic overlooking a river. Every sketch carried the same careful attention to light and open space. "Life," he answered after a long pause. "Or maybe I did." Eden considered the words before speaking. "People change." Her voice remained calm. "That does not mean every dream disappears. Sometimes it just waits until we are ready to recognize it again." Nico looked down at the sketchbook. For years he had believed those drawings belonged to someone who no longer existed. Yet, sitting there beneath the morning sunlight that Eden had insisted on letting into the house, they suddenly felt less like memories and more like unfinished conversations. Outside the study window, the front gate stood quiet. But Nico noticed 2 additional security officers beginning their patrol exactly as Marcus had ordered. Someone beyond those walls was still watching. Someone patient enough to wait. He closed the sketchbook carefully, rested his hand on the therapy timer Eden had left beside his coffee, and for the first time since the accident, he pressed the start button himself. The therapy timer reached 10 minutes, and Nico Morelli did not stop it. That surprised him more than the effort itself. By the time Eden Sullivan called the session complete, his shoulders burned, his palms ached from gripping the parallel bars, and a thin line of perspiration had gathered at his temple. He had not stood, he had not moved an inch. Still, for the first time in 6 weeks, he had finished what he started. Eden handed him a towel without offering praise. "You did not quit," she said. "That is enough for today." Nico studied her as he wiped his hands. Most people celebrated small progress too loudly. As though enthusiasm could make weakness less humiliating, Eden treated the moment with quiet respect. He appreciated that more than he intended to show. The next morning he found her in the greenhouse before breakfast. She stood between rows of roses his mother had planted years ago, holding a watering can in one hand and speaking softly into her phone. Nico stopped near the doorway when he heard the strain in her voice. "I know the deposit is due Friday, Claire. I said I would handle it." A pause followed. Eden turned away from the entrance, unaware that he was there. "No, do not call Aunt Rebecca. She already helped with the application fee." Another pause. "You are going to college. We are not having this argument again." Her tone remained gentle, but Nico recognized determination when he heard it. It was the same tone she used when refusing to close his curtains. "I have enough for the first payment," she continued. "I just need a little more time for the books and housing. Please stop worrying." Nico quietly backed into the hallway before she could notice him. He had known she needed the job to help her younger sister, but hearing the conversation changed something. Eden's confidence was not carelessness, it was armor. She walked through the mansion smiling because someone else depended on her believing problems could be solved. At breakfast, she arrived 7 minutes late with damp soil on the knee of her navy scrubs and a small scratch across the back of one hand. "The greenhouse hose has personal issues," she announced while setting down her coffee. "It attacked my shoe, then tried to flood the west corner." Oliver looked mildly concerned. "Those hoses were replaced last spring. Then one of them has developed a personality." Nico glanced at the dirt on her pants. "You were watering the roses." Eden paused. "I hope that was allowed. My mother preferred that people asked first." Her expression shifted. "I am sorry. Oliver said the gardener would not be here until Monday." And 2 of the beds looked dry. Nico looked toward the greenhouse windows beyond the dining room. His mother had once watered those roses before sunrise because she believed plants responded better to patience than schedules. "They should be watered every other day," he said. "Not from above. The leaves spot." Eden nodded immediately. "I will remember." He expected her to ask about his mother. She did not. Instead, she opened the therapy folder and began reviewing the morning exercises. Her restraint made him more curious than questions would have. "How old is your sister?" he asked. Eden looked up, surprised. 18. "Claire?" Her hand tightened slightly around the pen. "You heard me in the greenhouse." It was not an accusation, but the warmth left her voice. "I did not intend to, but you stayed long enough to hear." Nico accepted the correction. "Yes." For several seconds, the easy rhythm between them disappeared. Eden closed the folder. "Claire earned her place at school. She should not have to give it up because our family cannot write a large check." Nico watched her carefully. "Where are your parents?" The question landed harder than he expected. Eden's gaze dropped toward the coffee in front of her. "My mother died when Claire was 12. She paused. "My father died 3 years later." Nico heard the finality in her voice and understood that the subject held more than grief. "I am sorry." Eden gave a small nod. "Thank you." Oliver quietly left the room, taking the empty coffee service with him. The security officers moved farther into the hallway, offering privacy without being asked. Eden traced one finger along the edge of the folder. "My father worked nights at a neighborhood grocery store in Queens. He believed showing up mattered more than being important." Her voice remained steady, but the steadiness looked practiced now. "One evening he was caught in the middle of a dispute that had nothing to do with him. He never came home." Nico felt the room narrow around those words. The city was full of stories like that. Ordinary people paying for decisions made by men who believed power placed them above consequences. Men like the ones Nico had once commanded. Eden looked toward him at last. "That is why the agency hesitated to send me here." The truth settled between them. She had known what his name represented. She had come anyway. "Why did you accept?" he asked. Eden's blue eyes held his without fear. "Because I refuse to let the worst thing that happened to my family decide who deserves care." Nico had no answer. Outside the windows, morning light touched the greenhouse glass and turned every water droplet gold. Eden reopened the therapy folder as if the confession had cost enough for one day. "We should begin." Nico looked at her scratched hand, the stubborn set of her shoulders, and the quiet strength she carried for a sister who still believed the future was possible. Then he understood something that unsettled him more deeply than the sedan outside his gate. Eden Sullivan was not in his home because she had never been hurt by men like him. She was there because she had been hurt, and had chosen kindness anyway. The first sound Nico heard the next morning was laughter, not polite laughter, not the quiet, careful, kind people used inside his house. This was sudden, bright, and completely unrestrained. It came from the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable crash of something metal hitting the floor. Nico stopped his wheelchair at the end of the hallway. Oliver stood near the doorway with one hand covering his mouth, while Marcus faced the opposite direction with the rigid posture of a man determined not to react. Eden stood in the center of the kitchen holding a wooden spoon. A streak of flour crossed one cheek. On the floor beside her sat an overturned mixing bowl and what appeared to be half a pancake. "I can explain," she said. Nico looked at the ceiling, the counter, and finally the pancake stuck against the side of a cabinet. "That would be impressive." Eden pointed the spoon toward the old copper pan in front of her. "Oliver said your mother used to make Sunday pancakes. I thought breakfast might feel less like a medical appointment if I tried the recipe." Oliver cleared his throat. "I also warned Miss Sullivan that Mrs. Morelli never flipped them in the air." You mentioned that after I had already committed to the technique. Nico rolled farther into the kitchen. You threw breakfast at my furniture. Only one piece of breakfast. Eden glanced at the damaged pancake. The rest are behaving. A second pancake began to smoke gently in the pan behind her. Oliver reached over and turned off the burner. Eden closed her eyes. Most of them are behaving. The corner of Nico's mouth moved before he could stop it. Eden saw the change and froze. Oliver saw it too. So did Marcus, though he wisely kept his eyes on the window. Nico felt the unfamiliar expression disappear almost immediately. He had smiled, not out of courtesy. Not because someone expected him to. The sound that nearly followed was even more unsettling. A laugh. He had forgotten how close laughter lived to pain, how both tightened the chest and stole breath for a moment. Eden recovered first. She placed the spoon on the counter and nodded toward the breakfast table. I am going to pretend that was approval. It was not. Then I will settle for temporary mercy. 10 minutes later, they sat beside the open windows with 3 uneven pancakes, fresh coffee, and a bowl of strawberries between them. Eden had cleaned the flour from her face, but a pale streak remained near her hairline. Nico did not mention it. He found himself noticing how the morning felt different when nobody treated silence like a rule. Eden spoke about Claire's college orientation. Oliver complained mildly about modern appliances, and Marcus answered a security call near the doorway. Ordinary conversation moved around Nico without demanding anything from him. Then a car backfired somewhere beyond the estate walls. The sound was distant and harmless, but Nico's body reacted before his mind could catch up. His hand locked around the edge of the table. Air stopped in his lungs. The kitchen vanished beneath a memory of rain, shattered glass, and someone calling his name from too far away. The smell of coffee became gasoline. Sunlight became flashing headlights. He could not move, could not breathe, could not force the past back into the place where he kept it buried. Nico. Eden's voice reached him through the noise inside his head. She did not touch him. She did not crowd his chair. She crouched several feet away so he could see her clearly. Look at me. He tried, but the room kept slipping. You are in the kitchen, she said slowly. It is Tuesday morning. The windows are open. Oliver is beside the coffee machine. Marcus is at the door. Nothing in this room is asking you to be afraid. Nico dragged in a breath that hurt. Eden kept her voice steady. Tell me 5 things you can see. He stared at her. Do not make me do this. Then tell me one. The demand was gentle, but it gave him something solid to resist. His eyes moved toward the table. The blue bowl. Good. One more. The window again. Your ridiculous pancakes. A soft smile touched Eden's face. They are memorable. Another breath entered his lungs, then another. The kitchen slowly returned around him. Coffee, sunlight, wood beneath his hand. No rain, no broken glass, no voice calling from the dark. When the panic finally loosened its grip, exhaustion settled in its place. Nico looked away, ashamed of how much everyone had seen. Oliver had quietly left the room. Marcus stood farther down the hall, giving him privacy without abandoning his post. You should not have witnessed that, Nico said. I am your caregiver. Her voice was calm. Witnessing difficult moments is part of the job. Do not pity me. I do not. The answer came without hesitation. Nico looked at her. She held his gaze with the same honesty she had shown from the first day. No fear, no sympathy disguised as kindness, just presence. What happened that night? She asked softly. Nico's eyes shifted toward the distant river beyond the windows. For months he had refused to answer that question, from doctors, attorneys, and men who claimed they needed the truth. Yet Eden had not asked because she wanted information. She had asked because she had just watched the memory take him somewhere he could not escape alone. Someone died getting me out of the car, he said at last. The words barely rose above a whisper. Eden did not ask who. She did not ask how. She simply sat beside him in the quiet that followed. After a long moment, Nico looked toward the ruined pancake still clinging to the cabinet and felt something fragile return to his chest. This time, when he smiled, he did not force it away. By Friday, Nico Morelli had learned that recovery was less dramatic than people imagined. It was not a single breakthrough. It was a collection of ordinary decisions made when nobody was watching. Wake up before the curtains opened. Finish breakfast even when appetite disappeared. Complete 10 minutes of therapy, then 12, then 15. Sit in the greenhouse while Eden watered the roses. Answer Oliver when he asked a question instead of pretending not to hear. None of those things looked like victory. Together they began to feel like one. That morning Eden rolled a narrow wooden table into the therapy room and placed his old sketchbook on top of it. Nico stopped in the doorway. What is that doing here? Waiting for you. It belongs in my study. It belonged in a locked drawer for 17 years. She pulled a chair beside the table and set down 3 sharpened pencils. Today your hands need a different kind of exercise. Nico looked toward the parallel bars. My therapist assigned upper body work. This is upper body work. Eden lifted one pencil. Grip strength, wrist control, shoulder endurance. You invented that. She smiled. There are adapt difference. Nico rolled closer, though reluctantly. The sketchbook opened to an unfinished drawing of a community center beside a public park. Half the windows were missing. The entrance existed only as two faint pencil lines. He remembered starting it the week before his 20th birthday. He also remembered closing the book after his father called the idea sentimental. I do not draw anymore, he said. Eden placed the pencil near his right hand. Then do not draw. She sat back. Add one line. He stared at the unfinished page. You make everything sound simple. Simple and easy are not the same thing. The therapy room grew quiet. Sunlight crossed the table, touching the old graphite without erasing a single mark. Nico wrapped his fingers around the pencil. His hand trembled slightly from the exercises. He hated that Eden could see it. She did not look away, but she did not offer help either. She simply waited. He lowered the pencil to the paper and extended one of the window frames by less than an inch. The line was uneven. Nico frowned. It is crooked. So was the painting in the breakfast room. You fix that. Then fix this one. He drew the line again. Better, not perfect. Something in his chest loosened. 20 minutes passed without either of them noticing. By the time he stopped, the community center had an entrance, 6 windows, and a wide covered walkway facing the park. Eden leaned forward, careful not to touch the page. It looks welcoming. Nico studied the drawing. It needs more light. The words left him before he realized he had spoken them. Eden looked toward him, and he recognized the quiet understanding in her expression. She remembered the sentence from his first sketch. Every neighborhood deserves sunlight. She did not repeat it. That restraint mattered. After therapy, she insisted they eat lunch outside. Nico objected to the wind, the uneven stone path, and the possibility of rain despite the clear sky. Eden listened to every complaint while Oliver arranged a table beneath the covered terrace. You planned this before asking me, Nico said. I prepared for the possibility that you might agree. That is not the same thing. It worked. The terrace overlooked the greenhouse and the river beyond it. The air smelled of wet earth and roses warming beneath the afternoon sun. Nico had not eaten outside since before the accident. At first, every sound felt too sharp. A delivery truck passing beyond the gate. A dog barking somewhere down the road, leaves moving against stone. His body remained alert, searching for danger. Then Eden began telling Oliver about the time she accidentally brought a rescued pigeon into her childhood apartment and hid it in the laundry room for 2 days. Oliver listened with perfect seriousness until she admitted the bird had escaped during dinner and landed in her father's mashed potatoes. Nico tried to hold back the reaction. He failed. The laugh emerged quietly, rough from disuse but unmistakable. Eden stopped talking. Oliver looked down at his plate. Neither of them celebrated. They simply allowed the moment to exist. That kindness made the laughter easier to keep. Later, as Eden gathered the dishes, Marcus approached from the garden path. His expression was controlled, but Nico recognized concern beneath it. The sedan has not returned, Marcus said quietly. However, we traced the photograph to a print shop in Newark. The order was paid for in cash under a false name. Nico glanced toward Eden. She stood several feet away, speaking with Oliver, unaware of the conversation. Keep looking, he said. Marcus nodded, then lowered his voice. There is something else. The handwriting matches correspondence from Vincent Calder. The name struck Nico harder than the backfire had days earlier. Vincent had once sat at his table, advised his father, and called himself family. Nico kept his expression still. Are you certain? Not yet. Marcus looked toward Eden, then back at Nico. If it is him, Miss Sullivan may already be part of whatever he is planning. Nico watched Eden laugh softly as Oliver rescued a spoon she nearly dropped from the tray. She had brought sunlight into the breakfast room, music into the hallways, and movement back into his days. Until that moment, Nico had thought recovery meant learning how to live with what had been taken from him. Now he understood there was another lesson waiting. To care about someone was to give the world a new way to frighten you. He looked toward Marcus. Increase her protection without letting her notice. Marcus gave a single nod. Across the terrace, Eden turned and caught Nico watching her. She smiled, open and unguarded. Nico returned the smile, but the name Vincent Calder remained cold inside his mind. Vincent Calder had been absent from Nico Morelli's life for 6 years, yet the sound of his name brought every old instinct back at once. By sunset, the warmth of the terrace had vanished beneath a sky the color of steel. Nico sat in his study while Marcus arranged photographs, property records, and phone logs across the desk. Eden believed he was reviewing business documents. Nico had allowed that lie to stand because the truth would place fear inside the only person who had made the estate feel human again. Calder disappeared after your father died, Marcus said quietly. His accounts were emptied within 48 hours. We believed he left the country. Nico studied an old photograph of Vincent standing beside his father at a charity dinner. Grey suit, polished smile, a hand resting comfortably on the shoulder of a teenage Nico. Back then, Vincent had seemed dependable. He remembered birthdays, asked about school, and praised every decision that moved Nico closer to the family empire. Only years later had Nico understood that some men did not mentor children. They shaped future weapons. Why return now? Nico asked. Marcus placed another document in front of him. Because the accident changed the balance. Several former partners assumed you would never take control again. Calder may believe the Morelli name is unprotected. Nico looked toward the open sketchbook beside the files. That morning he had added another window to the community center. By evening, the old world had spread itself across the same desk. Influence beside imagination, fear beside light. Two lives competing for the same man. A knock sounded at the door before Eden entered, carrying a covered plate. Oliver said you skipped dinner. She noticed Marcus and the documents, then stopped. I can come back. We are finished, Nico said. Marcus understood the dismissal. He gathered the photographs, leaving only the old charity picture beneath Nico's hand. As he passed Eden, he gave her the same polite nod he always did, but Nico noticed Marcus check the hallway before walking away. The new security measures were becoming difficult to hide. Eden placed the plate near Nico's sketchbook. Grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, and vegetables Oliver insists are good for you. You sound unconvinced. I respect vegetables. I do not trust anyone who serves Brussels sprouts without an apology. Nico almost smiled, but her eyes shifted toward the photograph. Is that your father? She asked. Yes, and the man beside him? He considered lying. Eden had given him honesty even when it exposed the most painful part of her life. Offering her another lie suddenly felt smaller than caution. Vincent Calder. He advised my family for years. Eden waited, sensing the answer was incomplete. Was he close to you? I thought he was. Outside the study, footsteps passed the door, slower than usual. Security. Eden heard them too. There have been more guards around me today. Nico kept his expression neutral. The estate is reviewing its procedures. Marcus followed me to the greenhouse. Marcus follows everyone. He stood outside while I called Claire. Her voice remained calm, but disappointment entered it. That was not procedure. Nico turned his wheelchair toward the window. Darkness had settled over the grounds, and reflections made the glass appear like a black mirror. Someone has been watching the house. Silence followed. When he looked back, Eden had not moved. The sedan, she said. It was not a question. Nico realized she had noticed more than he believed. Yes, and you decided not to tell me. There was nothing useful you could do with the information. Her expression changed, not to fear, but anger held carefully behind restraint. I could decide whether I wanted to stay. Leaving would make you easier to reach. Staying without knowing the truth makes me a prisoner. The word struck harder than Nico expected. He had built his life around control, convinced that protection justified decisions other people never agreed to. His father had used the same logic. So had Vincent. You are not a prisoner, Nico said. Then stop deciding for me. Eden's voice softened, which somehow made it more powerful. You ask me to earn your trust. You cannot ask for mine while hiding the reason strangers are photographing me. Nico rested one hand against the arm of his chair. She was right. That truth irritated him because it left no safe answer. The message came with a photograph of you, he admitted. Eden's face lost color, but she did not look away. What did it say? He told her. Every word. He explained the handwriting, Vincent's disappearance, and the possibility that the man believed Nico's injury had made the estate vulnerable. Eden listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked toward the photograph. Do you think he caused your accident? Nico's eyes settled on Vincent's smiling face. I do not know. It was the first time he had said those words aloud. The uncertainty had lived inside him for 6 months, hidden beneath grief and anger. Eden pulled a chair closer, but did not sit until he nodded. Then we find out, she said, together. Nico studied her. You should be afraid. I am. Her honesty left no room for performance. Being afraid does not mean I surrender every choice. A secure phone vibrated on the desk. Nico answered immediately. Marcus's voice came through low and controlled. The Westgate camera just went offline. The backup system shows a vehicle approaching the service entrance. Nico turned toward Eden. The old instinct told him to order her upstairs, lock every door and decide everything alone. Instead, he held out his hand. "Stay beside me." Eden placed her hand in his without hesitation, and somewhere beyond the dark windows, the estate gates began to open. The service gates opened only 3 feet before Marcus forced them to stop. From the study window, Nico watched a dark sport utility vehicle idle beyond the barrier, its headlights cutting across the wet stone driveway. Eden stood beside him. Though he could feel the tension in her fingers, the vehicle did not advance, it simply waited. Marcus spoke through the secure phone. "No visible weapons, 1 driver, 1 passenger. They are requesting permission to deliver a message." Nico looked toward the black glass beyond the gates. "Who sent them? They will only speak to you." Eden turned to him. "Do not go outside." The words came quickly, stripped of every trace of her usual humor. Nico almost answered with an order, then stopped himself. She had asked for honesty, not obedience. "I am not going outside," he said, "but I need to know what they want." He instructed Marcus to bring the passenger into the front hall after a full security check. Less than 10 minutes later, an elderly man entered beneath the watch of 4 guards. He wore a dark wool coat damp from the evening mist and carried no bag, phone, or visible identification. Nico recognized him immediately. Samuel Bell had once managed one of Vincent Calder's private offices. He had disappeared the same week Vincent vanished. "Mr. Morelli," Samuel said, his voice tired, "I hoped I would never have to see you again." Nico remained near the base of the staircase with Eden beside him and Marcus several feet behind. "Then you chose a strange way toward Eden." Recognition passed across his face. "Miss Sullivan." Eden stiffened. Nico's voice cooled. "You know her?" "No." Samuel lowered his eyes. "But Vincent does." The front hall became silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the security team waited for Nico's signal. "Why?" Eden asked. Samuel looked at her carefully. "Because your father did not die in a random dispute." The color left Eden's face. Nico felt her hand slip from his. She took 1 slow step forward. "What are you talking about?" Samuel reached inside his coat. Only after Marcus gave permission, he removed a small sealed envelope and placed it on the entry table. "Your father kept records for the grocery store where he worked. Deliveries, vendor payments, storage rentals. He noticed one company paying for warehouse space it never used. The company belonged to Vincent Calder." Eden stared at the envelope as though it might change shape if she looked long enough. "My father was a night manager. He was not involved in anything else. That is exactly why Vincent underestimated him," Samuel replied. "Your father copied the records and planned to turn them over to a federal investigator. Vincent learned about it before he could." Nico watched Eden's face carefully. It moved through her in small, devastating changes. Her shoulders drew inward. Her breathing became shallow. Her eyes remained fixed on a truth she had never been allowed to know. "Why tell me now?" she asked. Samuel looked toward Nico. "Because Vincent believes the copies still exist, he thinks your father gave them to someone in the family." "Claire," Eden whispered. Nico immediately understood. Her younger sister, the college deposit. The ordinary life Eden had been fighting to protect, all of it had just become part of Vincent's search. Nico turned to Marcus. "Put a team on Claire now, quietly. No one approaches her without Eden's permission." Marcus nodded and stepped away to make the call. Eden looked at Nico. For the first time since entering the mansion, fear stood openly in her expression. "Then we secure the campus, her hotel, and every route home." Nico kept his voice steady because hers no longer could be. Samuel pushed the envelope closer. "Inside is the address of a storage unit your father rented under another name. Vincent has searched for it for years. Eden did not touch it." "Why should we trust you?" she asked. Samuel's face tightened with something that looked like shame. "You should not. I worked for him. I helped hide things I should have exposed. But Vincent is no longer trying to recover documents. He is trying to erase everyone who might know where they are." Nico studied him, including you. Samuel gave a small me. A phone rang in the hallway. Marcus returned seconds later, his expression controlled but urgent. "Claire checked out of her hotel 40 minutes ago. Her roommate says a car service arrived for her, but Claire did not request one." Eden grabbed the edge of the entry table to steady herself. "Call her. We have tried," Marcus said. "Her phone is off." Nico felt the old world rise inside him, cold and efficient, offering simple answers through control. But Eden was not a problem to manage. She was a person standing beside him while the ground disappeared beneath her. He turned toward her. "I need you to tell Marcus everything about Claire. Friends, routines, anything she would notice if something felt wrong." Eden swallowed hard and nodded. "She always texts me before getting into a car. Always." Her voice broke on the final word. Nico reached for the envelope Samuel had brought. Inside was a brass key and a handwritten address in Queens. Beneath it, another message waited in Vincent's neat block letters. Bring the key and the girl comes home. Nico read the sentence once, then folded the paper and looked toward Eden. But something stronger had begun to form beside it. We are getting my sister back, she said. Nico closed his hand around the key. Yes, he answered, and this time Vincent Calder will not decide how the story ends. The brass key felt heavier than it should have. Nico Morelli held it between two fingers while Marcus traced the address in Queens through property records, utility accounts, and old business filings. The storage unit belonged to a company that had dissolved 12 years earlier. The registered owner was a retired accountant who had been dead for 6. Vincent Calder had chosen the hiding place carefully. He wants us to move quickly, Marcus said. That is why we should not. Eden stood near the study window with her phone pressed against both hands. She had called Claire 7 times. Each attempt went directly to voicemail. The silence after every call seemed to take something from her. Nico watched her without interrupting. He understood the urge to fix fear with action. He also understood how easily urgency could become obedience when someone else controlled the clock. The message says, "Bring the key," Eden said. "Then we bring it. Not before we know what it opens." Envelope. Vincent expects panic. We give him patience. Eden turned toward him. "My sister is missing." "I know. Then do not speak to me like this is another negotiation." The words landed hard. But Nico did not defend himself. She was not wrong. His calm could look like distance to someone whose entire world had just narrowed to one unanswered phone. He moved closer. "I am not asking you to trust the situation," he said. "I am asking you to trust that I will not gamble with Claire's life just to feel useful." For several seconds, anger and fear fought silently across her face. Then she looked down at the key. "What do we do?" Nico turned to Marcus. "Send a team to the storage facility without entering. Check every camera within a half-mile radius. Find the car service that picked Claire up, quietly." Marcus nodded. "And Vincent, he believes we are still deciding." Nico looked toward Samuel Bell, who had remained near the doorway under guard. "We let him shift it uneasily. Vincent will expect confirmation. Then call him." The older man stared at Nico. "He will know if I am lying. Do not lie." Nico's voice stayed calm. "Tell him Eden is frightened. Tell him we are coming." Eden looked at him sharply. "We are? Eventually." Samuel made the call from a secured phone while Marcus recorded every second. Vincent answered after one ring. His voice was smooth, familiar, almost warm. "Samuel, I was beginning to think loyalty had finally found you." Samuel swallowed. "They have the key, and Miss Sullivan?" Nico watched Eden's face as her own name traveled through the speaker. She did not look away. "She is here," Samuel said. "Good. Tell Nico the girl remains comfortable as long as no one becomes ambitious." The line went quiet. Nico leaned closer to the phone. "Vincent." A soft breath followed, then a faint chuckle. "Nico, I wondered how long it would take before you stopped hiding behind other men." Eden closed her eyes briefly. Nico kept his attention on the voice. "Let Claire go. Bring the key. You know I will verify she is safe first." "You always did confuse control with intelligence." Vincent sounded almost amused. "Midnight, the old ferry terminal in Red Hook. Bring Eden. Bring the key. No police." The call ended. Marcus immediately began giving instructions, but Nico remained still. The old ferry terminal had belonged to Morelli interests years ago. Vincent knew every entrance, every blind corner, every abandoned office. He had not chosen it for convenience. He had chosen it because memory could be used like architecture. "You are not going," Nico said. Eden's eyes opened. "He asked for me. That is exactly why. You promised not to decide for me." The reminder came quietly, and that made it impossible to ignore. Nico looked toward the sketchbook resting on the desk beside the evidence. For most of his life, he had believed protection meant standing between danger and everyone else. Eden had forced him to see that protection without trust was simply another form of control. "Then we decide together," he said. "But not before we know where Claire is." 20 minutes later, Marcus returned with the first useful answer. The car service had used false information, but traffic cameras captured the vehicle crossing into Brooklyn. Another camera recorded it near Red Hook. Claire had not been taken far. "The storage facility cameras?" Nico asked. "One vehicle arrived there 2 hours ago, then left for the ferry terminal." Marcus placed a still image on the desk. The driver was Samuel's former assistant. In the back seat, barely visible through the window, sat Claire Sullivan, upright, alert, alive. Eden pressed one hand over her mouth. Relief crossed her face so quickly it almost became pain. Nico turned to Marcus. "We go to the storage unit first." Samuel frowned. "Vincent ordered the terminal." "Which means the terminal is where he wants our attention." Nico picked up the brass key. "The truth is in Queens." The storage facility stood beneath elevated train tracks, surrounded by closed repair shops and narrow streets shining with rain. Nico remained in the secured vehicle while Marcus's team checked the building. Eden sat beside him, staring through the windshield as trains thundered overhead. "Claire used to hate storms," she said quietly. "She would climb into my bed and pretend she only came in because I looked scared." Nico looked at her. "She sounds like you." Eden almost smiled. Marcus returned and opened the rear door. "Unit is clear." Inside the small concrete room waited a metal filing cabinet, 3 sealed boxes, and an old tape recorder. The brass key opened the cabinet. Eden pulled the top drawer slowly. Inside were copies of warehouse contracts, payment ledgers, photographs, and a signed statement written by her father. At the bottom lay a small digital recorder labeled with one name, Vincent Calder. Vincent's younger voice filled the room, discussing hidden accounts, false companies, and the night Nico's car was sabotaged. No graphic detail, no uncertainty, just proof. Eden looked at Nico as the final piece of his past settled into place. Vincent had caused the accident. He had also arranged the dispute that took her father. Their grief had never been separate. It had been designed by the same man. Then Eden's phone rang. Claire's name appeared on the screen. She answered with shaking hands. "Claire?" Her sister's voice came through, frightened but steady. "Eden, they left me alone in an office. I found a phone. I can see water and an old red clock outside." Nico knew the clock. It stood above the eastern entrance of the ferry terminal. He closed the recorder in his hand and looked toward Marcus. "Now we go to Red Hook," he said, "but this time Vincent is the only one walking into a trap." The old ferry terminal stood against the East River like a building the city had forgotten to finish. Its red clock glowed above the eastern entrance, each minute moving with unbearable calm while rain swept across the empty parking lot. Nico Morelli watched the terminal through the windshield of the secured vehicle as Marcus reviewed the plan one final time. Federal agents had already received copies of the recorder, the ledgers, and Eden's father's statement. They were positioned beyond the property line, waiting for proof that Claire was safely separated from Vincent before moving in. For most of Nico's life, he would have handled the situation differently, quietly, permanently, according to rules that belonged to the Morelli name rather than the law. Tonight, that old instinct still lived inside him, but it no longer controlled the decision. Eden sat beside him with her phone held tightly in both hands. Claire had managed one final whisper before the borrowed phone went silent. "Second floor, office facing the river, blue door." Marcus's team had located the room through old building plans. "She is still there," Eden said, as though repeating the fact could keep it true. Nico looked at her. "And Vincent, waiting in the main hall." "For us," Nico nodded. Eden turned toward the terminal. "Then he believes he still controls the story. He does not." Marcus opened the rear door. "We are ready." The rescue did not begin with shouting or force. It began with darkness. The terminal lights went out section by section as the utility system Marcus had mapped years ago shut down. Emergency lamps flickered on, turning the windows pale red. While Vincent's attention shifted toward the main entrance, 2 members of Marcus' team entered through a maintenance corridor beneath the eastern stairwell. Nico remained connected through a secure earpiece, listening to every quiet update. "Second floor clear." A pause. "Blue door located." Eden stopped breathing beside him. Another pause followed, longer than the first. Then Marcus's voice came through. "Claire is safe." Eden closed her eyes. And the first sound she made was not a sob, but a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Her hand found Nico's. He held it while Marcus confirmed that Claire was being taken through the service exit to the waiting federal team. Only after the vehicle carrying her sister disappeared from the terminal grounds did Eden release Nico's hand. "Now what?" she asked. Nico looked toward the red clock. "Now Vincent learns that fear is not the same thing as power." He entered the terminal through the main doors with Eden beside him and Marcus several steps behind. The vast hall smelled of river air, wet concrete, and old wood. Vincent Calder stood beneath the broken departure board wearing a charcoal overcoat, his silver hair perfectly arranged despite the storm. He looked older than the man in Nico's memories, but not weaker. Some people carried age like wisdom. Vincent carried it like evidence that consequences had missed him for too long. "You brought her," Vincent said, looking at Eden. Nico stopped several yards away. Claire is no longer here. For the first time, Vincent's expression shifted, only slightly. You always were impatient. No, Nico said. I was obedient. There is a difference. Vincent's gaze moved toward the wheelchair, then back to Nico's face. Your father understood what you never did. Families survive because someone is willing to do what decent men cannot. Eden stood quietly at Nico's side. He could feel the tension in her, but she did not step back. My father was decent, she said. You mistook that for weakness. Vincent looked at her as though she were an inconvenience rather than the daughter of the man whose life he had damaged. Your father should have ignored what did not concern him. Nico felt the old anger rise, cold and familiar. Years ago, he would have answered that anger with the very language Vincent expected. Instead, Nico removed the digital recorder from his coat pocket and held it where Vincent could see. He was concerned with the truth. Vincent stared at the device. You do not know what you have. Warehouse records, false companies, hidden accounts. Your voice describing the sabotage of my car. Nico kept his tone calm. And a signed statement from Patrick Sullivan. Eden's head turned sharply at the sound of her father's name, but Nico did not look away from Vincent. Copies are already with federal investigators. Every account you hid is being frozen. Every company you used is being reviewed. This building is surrounded. Vincent's composure finally cracked. You would hand your family's business to the government? I would end it. The answer echoed through the terminal. Nico had not planned to say the words there, beneath the remains of his father's empire, but once spoken, they felt inevitable. The Morelli organization ends tonight. The legal companies will be audited. The illegal ones will be surrendered. Anyone willing to cooperate will have that chance. Anyone who refuses will answer for their own choices. Vincent stared at him with open disbelief. You are destroying your inheritance. Nico looked toward Eden. She had taught him that recovery did not mean returning to the man he had been. It meant deciding who he would become next. No, he said, I am refusing to pass it on. Blue and red light began to move across the high terminal windows. Federal agents entered through both sides of the hall, their voices clear and controlled as they approached Vincent. He did not resist. Men like him rarely believed the ending had arrived until someone else closed the door. As agents led him away, Vincent looked back at Nico. Your father would be ashamed. Nico felt the old wound open, then quietly close. My mother would not. Outside, Eden ran to Claire beneath the covered entrance. The sisters held each other without words while rain moved beyond the roofline. Nico watched from several feet away, giving them the privacy grief had denied for years. Marcus stopped beside him. What happens now? Nico looked at the recorder in his hand, then toward the red clock above the terminal doors. We tell the truth, he said. All of it. For the first time in his life, Nico Morelli understood that ending a debt did not require collecting it. Sometimes it required becoming the last person willing to carry it. 3 months after Vincent Calder's arrest, Nico Morelli stood between the parallel bars and discovered that hope could be heavier than his own body. The therapy room looked different now. The dark curtains were gone. Morning light covered the floor. His old sketchbook rested open on a nearby table beside updated plans for a rehabilitation center overlooking the Hudson River. Yet none of that made the metal braces around his legs feel lighter. Eden stood several feet away with her arms folded, watching without hovering. She no longer counted every second aloud. Nico had learned to count for himself. Shift your weight forward, his physical therapist said. Do not rush. Nico tightened his grip around the bars. His shoulders trembled. The muscles in his back pulled against months of weakness, and his knees threatened to surrender beneath him. He had managed to stand with support several times during the past 6 weeks, but today was different. Today the therapist had asked him to release one hand. Nico stared at his right hand as though it belonged to someone else. You do not have to prove anything, Eden said quietly. That sounds suspiciously like permission to quit. No. A small smile touched her face. It is permission to choose, choice. She always brought him back to that word. Vincent had used fear to take choices from people. Nico's father had used duty. Nico himself had once used protection. Eden had taught him that even kindness became a cage when it denied someone the right to decide. He slowly lifted his right hand from the bar. For one breath, his body remained upright, then his balance shifted. The therapist moved closer, but Eden did not. She trusted him enough not to rescue him from every difficult second. Nico caught the bar again before falling back into the chair. Frustration burned through him. 3 seconds. That is progress. It felt longer. Most honest things do, Eden replied. Nico looked toward her. She wore soft grey scrubs today. her auburn hair tied back, the same canvas bag resting near the door. So much had changed since she first carried it into his silent house, yet she still forgot to close one pocket. A phone charger and 2 pens were visible inside. The ordinary detail steadied him more than praise could have. The month since Red Hook had been filled with statements, audits, hearings and truths that arrived faster than anyone could absorb them. Vincent remained in federal custody while investigators built cases from Patrick Sullivan's records and the recovered recordings. Samuel Bell had entered a cooperation agreement and provided evidence about companies Vincent had controlled. Claire returned safely to Boston, completed her first semester, and called Eden every Sunday without fail. Nico had surrendered the Morelli organization's hidden accounts, transferred legitimate employees into independently managed companies, and created a restitution fund for families harmed by the illegal business his name had protected. Some people called it weakness, others called it strategy. Nico called it overdue. After therapy, Eden found him in the greenhouse studying construction plans spread across a wrought iron table. His mother's roses had entered their winter rest, leaving the room quieter than usual. The architect called, she said. The city approved the revised entrance. Nico tapped the drawing. The ramp was too steep. You noticed before the entire engineering team. I have developed strong opinions about ramps. Eden sat across from him. The proposed Morelli Renewal Center would include physical therapy, trauma counseling, occupational training, and legal support for families affected by organized crime. Nico had refused to name it after himself, but the board had insisted the Morelli name should become accountable for rebuilding what it had once helped damage. Claire had suggested the word renewal. Eden traced the edge of the blueprint. Patrick Sullivan Community Library, she read softly. You added my father's name. His records made all of this possible. You never told me. I wanted you to see it before the sign was ordered. Her eyes remained on the page. Nico could not read everything in her expression, but he saw gratitude and grief existing without cancelling each other. He would have liked the windows, she said. The library filled one side of the center, with wide glass walls facing a public garden. Nico looked toward his first sketchbook. Every neighborhood deserves sunlight, Eden smiled. You remembered, I never forgot. The words carried more than architecture, and both of them heard it. Their relationship had changed in quiet increments, shared breakfasts, therapy sessions, late conversations about Claire, his mother, and lives they might have lived under different circumstances. Neither had named what grew between them. Nico feared naming it would make it another thing the world could take. Eden feared nothing aloud, but he had noticed the way she sometimes paused at the end of the day, as though leaving the room required more effort than entering it. The agency called this morning, she said. Nico's attention sharpened. Why? My original contract ends next week. The greenhouse suddenly felt colder. Renew it. Eden looked at him gently. You cannot solve every uncomfortable moment with paperwork. It is an employment contract. Paperwork is the appropriate solution, Nico. The softness in her voice stopped him. You do not need a full-time caregiver anymore. He looked toward the parallel bars visible through the open corridor. She was right. His medical team had recommended reducing daily. He should have felt proud. Instead, the progress he had fought for suddenly resembled an approaching goodbye. What will you do? He asked. The center needs a rehabilitation director. Eden slid a second page from beneath the blueprints. Her name appeared beneath the proposed position. The board offered me the job. Nico stared at the page. Did you accept? I wanted to ask whether you believed I was qualified. You know you are. Then yes. Relief moved through him before he could hide it. Eden would leave the guest suite, but not his life. The difference mattered more than he knew how to say. She stood and moved toward the doorway. Your afternoon session starts in 20 minutes. Nico looked at the parallel bars, then at her. Eden. She turned. He placed both hands on the table and pushed himself upward. The movement was slow, imperfect, and supported by locked braces, but he rose until he stood behind the chair without holding the bars. Eden froze. Nico's arms trembled against the table. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3. He lifted one hand. You were right, he said through an unsteady breath. About what? Her eyes shone, but she did not move toward him. She understood this moment belonged to his choice. Recovery was never about getting my old life back. Nico released the table and took one careful step toward her. His leg moved barely a few inches, but it moved. Eden covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Nico reached for the table again, breathing hard, still standing. It was about making room for a different one. 1 year after Nico Morelli took his first step toward Eden Sullivan, The Morelli Renewal Center opened its doors beneath a clear September sky. The building stood 3 stories above the Hudson River, all warm brick, wide windows, and open courtyards filled with maple trees. Sunlight reached every hallway. Children waited in the library while their parents met with counselors. Veterans worked with physical therapists in the rehabilitation wing. Families who could not afford legal help sat with advocates in quiet offices overlooking the garden. Near the entrance, a bronze sign carried the name Patrick Sullivan Community Library. Eden stood beside it with Claire, both of them holding back tears as the first visitors walked inside. Claire had returned from Boston for the ceremony after completing another semester. She was healthy, determined, and already talking about studying social work. Her tuition had been covered through scholarships and a modest family fund created from Patrick Sullivan's recovered estate records, not from Nico's private money. Eden had insisted on that distinction. Nico respected it. He waited near the courtyard in a dark suit, one hand resting on a polished cane. His wheelchair remained nearby, folded beside Oliver's chair, because recovery had taught him not to confuse progress with pride. Some days he could walk 50 feet. Other days he could not cross a room without assistance. He no longer treated either kind of day as failure. Marcus approached with a slim folder beneath one arm. "The final rulings came through this morning," he said. Nico opened it carefully. Vincent Calder had been convicted on federal conspiracy, financial fraud, obstruction, and kidnapping charges. The sentence would keep him in federal prison for the rest of his life. Samuel Bell received a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation and had entered a witness protection program after providing evidence against the remaining companies. Every hidden account tied to Calder had been seized. The last illegal Morelli operation had no partner remained unaccounted for, no business remained hidden behind another name. The debt was finally closed. Nico returned the folder. "Send copies to Eden and Claire." Marcus nodded. "Already done." He looked toward the crowded courtyard, where former Morelli employees now worked as security staff, drivers, maintenance supervisors, and administrators under independent management. "Your father would not recognize this place." Nico looked at the glass library walls reflecting the afternoon sun. "That is the point." Across the courtyard, Eden noticed him watching and smiled. She had become the center's rehabilitation director, respected by doctors, therapists, and every patient who discovered that her kindness came with impossible schedules and very little tolerance for excuses. She still carried the same canvas bag. One pocket still refused to stay closed. When she reached Nico, she glanced at the cane. "You have been standing too long. You have been giving orders all morning." "Only useful ones." "A matter of opinion." Eden looked toward the wheelchair. "Sit before the speeches." Nico obeyed, not because she had won, but because he had learned that accepting care was not surrender. Claire joined them and handed Eden a small velvet box. "You left this in my bag." Eden's face changed immediately. "Claire, I was instructed to deliver it at exactly 3:15. She looked toward Nico with open amusement. Apparently timing is very important. Eden turned slowly toward him. Nico had negotiated mergers, faced courtrooms, and dismantled an empire without allowing his voice to shake. Now every prepared sentence disappeared. He took the box from Claire and opened it. Inside rested a simple ring with a small oval diamond set between 2 green stones, the color of his mother's greenhouse in spring. "I spent most of my life believing love meant keeping people safe by making choices for them," he said. "You taught me that real love leaves room for choice." Eden's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Around them, the courtyard noise seemed to soften. Nico held out the ring. "I do not need a caregiver anymore. I do not want an employee. I want a partner who will open every curtain I try to close, correct every crooked painting, and remind me when I am confusing fear with wisdom." A quiet laugh escaped her through the tears. "That sounds like a demanding position. The benefits are excellent." Claire covered her mouth to hide a smile. Oliver openly failed to hide his. "Eden Sullivan, will you build a life with me?" She lowered herself beside his chair until they were eye to eye. "Yes," she whispered. "But I am keeping my own office." "Non-negotiable," he agreed. 6 months later, they married in the greenhouse beneath the roses Nico's mother had planted. Claire stood beside Eden. Marcus served as Nico's witness. Oliver cried before anyone else and denied it afterward. There were no reporters, no politicians, and no guests invited for influence. Only people who had remained when staying required courage. By the following spring, Eden and Nico moved into a smaller house near the center, designed from one of the sketches he had drawn at 17. Wide windows faced the river. A ramp curved through the front garden. The rooms were bright, practical, and built to welcome people rather than impress them. Nico continued therapy. Some mornings he walked beside Eden with his cane. On difficult days, she pushed his chair while he complained about her speed. Claire graduated 2 years later and joined the center's family advocacy program. The Restitution Fund continued supporting families harmed by the former Morelli network, audited publicly every year. The Patrick Sullivan Library expanded its evening classes. No hidden account, unanswered crime, or unfinished obligation remained. The city once remembered Nico Morelli for the power he controlled. In time, it remembered him for the power he gave away. And whenever visitors asked what had inspired the renewal center, Nico would look through the sunlit windows toward Eden, usually correcting someone's posture or rescuing another hopeless plant, and give the only answer that had ever felt completely true. "She did not teach me how to stand," he would say. "She taught me what was worth standing for."